Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another episode of Lemongrass Roots, where we talk about all things SAP. Today, I'm delighted to have back one of my favorite guests, Robert Holland, the Chief Research Officer in SAP Insider. Welcome, Robert. How are you?
I am very well, Eamonn. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you back and great to talk again about some interesting topics. Today, we're going to talk about a report that SAP Insider has released recently on AI adoption and maturity in the SAP ecosystem. So this is a topic which I know from our customers and listeners is something very close to people's heart. They really want to learn more about how AI and the SAP ecosystem can affect them, can benefit them, but really interestingly, what's everybody else up to? So today we're going to talk about the results of your survey. Um, I suppose if we open up first with the population, it's always good to have a reliable sample. So do you want to talk a little bit, Robert, about who you asked to respond to this survey?
Yeah, absolutely. So we went and we sort of looked at our audience, the SAP Insider community, and we tried to send or target this survey at folks that were involved in AI decisions or influencing AI decisions within their organizations. So, as you can sort of see, they came from a global data set, but primarily from North America, a little over half from North America. And I don't know that that's because, folks in other regions aren't necessarily using AI, but I think folks in North America may be a little ahead in their consideration of AI. And they're perhaps more likely to be, thinking about and taking a survey. And then, obviously, in the different roles that these respondents had in their organizations, the vast majority were in IT somewhere. That's the largest respondent group. But, I thought it was interesting that data and analytics was the second biggest group. And when you sort of think about where you can leverage AI, that makes a lot of sense. That
Yeah.
these are the folks that are, sort of thinking about where, how can I enhance what I'm doing with AI?
And it's not a surprise to see, new technologies start in the IT area. So they're the
Mm,
people who often get to grips with, the plumbing, as it were, getting things set up, trying out the first POCs. But you really, as you say, you want to see other parts of the technical teams and the business teams start to adopt them. And I think that's reflected well in that response. And certainly, as you rightly say, everybody in the data team is being tasked with figure out how to use the AI capabilities that are out there.
yeah.
And one of the first questions that comes back is we need to get the data clean to get the right results from AI. So yeah, really good observation that the data team is certainly one of those we've seen in customers as well, most heavily engaged.
It's
Um,
it's the foundation for everything you're doing, right? So if you don't have your data right, then it's the whole garbage in, garbage out philosophy, right?
exactly. And one final thing I would say on this as well. I mean, one thing I've noticed um, within the plumbing, as it were, the IT piece of this, that there are brand new concepts in terms of how you plug in LLMs, not just in terms of the basic capability of understanding endpoints and how you would connect an endpoint to your existing landing zone, for example, but the load balancing is very different. You now have to manage across different models. Um, and of course, security and how you bake security into your landing zone becomes a brand new model for most IT teams.
Yeah, I think that that's very true because it's you have to think differently about securing AI and what you're doing with AI than you do with simply securing your network or securing the applications that are running in the cloud or, wherever you happen to have them. I mean, it's because you got to think about things like, well, what if this piece of my proprietary data or this, you know, um, PII ends up getting uploaded to a model somewhere? What does that mean? And how do I prevent that? And that's not the typical sort of thing you're thinking about when you're thinking about security and when you're thinking about protecting systems. I mean, maybe you've got zero trust, maybe you've got, um, firewalls, you've got, encrypted channels between between your users in locations and the cloud. But this is another potential vector
Mm.
that you've got to think about, and it's something you got to think about differently. And this is why adopting a lot of these new technologies, you do have to have folks or work with folks that sort of understand, well, what are the scenarios here, and how do I ensure that I'm protected in everything I'm doing?
And it reminds me of one example I saw recently, which really made me laugh, was we were connecting to a customer's subscription, and they had an open AI subscription, I think, but they had some filtering enabled, and all the standard filters. The difficulty was is we were passing ABAP programs to the model to kind of get some diagnosis of the ABAP, and we were getting rejections from the filters because the code had generated components, and in ABAP, a lot of generated components have XXX in the name, and that was failing the sexually explicit filter, which we all thought was very funny, given that these were very boring programs. But it does show that even the basic kind of, as it were, best practice doesn't quite fit yet, and we're still a long way off having the right controls in place today.
Yeah, it is. I was expecting ZZZ, but apparently that's not the only sensitive part of your SAP system.
Exactly. So we've taken a couple of the questions from the survey, not all of them, but a couple of ones I thought would be interesting to chat about. So we'll just go through those now. The first one is around the overall capability and maturity within the organization that the respondents were in. Again,
Yeah.
obviously a few things jump out of this, but maybe give us the voiceover and your view on this slide.
Well, I mean, I think, and this makes perfect sense given where the vast majority of SAP customers are today, particularly when it comes to using AI in their SAP systems. But this is obviously more general. It's not just related. It's not just within SAP. It's connected to SAP and connected to their environment. More than two-thirds of in the very early stages of AI adoption, it's either ad hoc at best, or it's perhaps foundational, right? Very few organizations are at the integrated, optimized, or transformational stage. But there is we're seeing growth there, and 12% isn't a terrible number, when it comes to transformational, and, integrated is also, we're seeing some that I think that there's a good number of folks there too. But I think it just sort of shows us people are at the beginning, still at the beginning of their journey. And particularly when you think about where SAP has enabled AI and where where you can use it and the types of AI you can use, makes perfect sense.
Mm. No, I agree. And I've seen almost exactly this picture across our customer base. And while you're right, I mean, a lot of people are still trying to get to grips with what do I do with ECC? What do I do with RISE? What do I do with Clean Core? All of those questions that they're trying to wrangle with, getting to the AI kind of cherry on top is taking a while. But interestingly, and I think this maybe goes some way to explain that 12%, we've seen some customers have effectively like SWAT teams, little dedicated AI teams that go off there and just run at their own pace. And they're seeing some really cool results. I mean, not necessarily, overlapping exactly where SAP are trying to put AI in, but in and around the data of SAP and certainly into non-SAP areas. And these guys often are, cloud engineers that are taking their skill set of pipeline-driven development into this space, and that same agility. So, I could definitely name a number of customers in our customer base who are completely on that side of the fence, even though, most of them would be exactly where you are in your response.
Yeah, I think whether you call them tiger teams or ninja teams, or, there's a former manager I had who used to always talk about the ninja team coming in. And it's like, are we attacking the customer or are we fixing the customer? But yeah, I mean, a small team really has the opportunity to often make a huge difference because they can sort of explore the different topics and they can really start to, bring skills that they have, perhaps as you said, from a previous role to sort of bear on something. And, they can make a big difference quickly, and they can really, produce, you know, um, pilots or potential areas where there can be significant value in a tool like AI. Um, that a larger team might struggle more to sort of be nimble enough to sort of adapt to.
Yeah, and that's exactly the description of those guys. The teams of maybe 4 or 5 people. They seem to make really good progress, slightly unconstrained by having the budget and the worry of 50 people, for example. So yeah, that's quite an interesting little pattern, and hopefully we'll see more and more customers move that way. But I guess even before you get to that maturity, you have to start with things like governance. And I like this slide because certainly in any other technology, when you look back, you realize that without governance, nothing really happens. So it's important to get ahead, make sure that you're laying down those controls before you get to the actual work. So again, is that what you saw in this response, or was there more detail that you can voice over on this?
It's interesting because, I mean, if you look at the percentages, right, we saw on the last slide that 34% were just right at the beginning, and then another 34% were, maybe starting to do something more. But it's interesting that the governance is a little further ahead of the AI usage, which is actually, to my thinking, a good sign because it means that people are thinking about governance and responsible AI before they're necessarily, throwing a lot of things out there and starting to do things because, AI opens different doors and, potential vectors for threats that that go well beyond what you're doing to protect your existing SAP and enterprise environments today. And if you're not thinking about them early in the process, that leaves you with potential vulnerabilities. And so the fact that, this actually, yeah, I mean, totally understand only, 6% are in the embedded and automated phase and 18% are even operationalized. But the fact that so many are, really have reached that more foundational phase where, maybe they've got documentation in place, but they simply don't have a broader scope yet. I think it's actually good to see people thinking about governance and responsibility when it comes to AI, a little ahead of where they are in the adoption of it.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that I suspect is that the move from that middle one, foundational, to the next two is quite a lift. And
Yeah.
Trying to get those things, those operating models in place with the tools and the capabilities, it's probably going to be quite a change for some customers. And maybe that foundational is the things we're all aware of, like controls on Copilot and controls on public LLMs, etc. Is that what you're hearing as well? That kind of that there is as you say, new thinking, new controls, a new operating model required for AI.
I mean, I think you're absolutely right that move from, it's relatively, and I'm not going to say easy, but there's a pretty set path to move from having, no governance in place to, having foundational governance. But that next step is a significant one. And especially as you expand it to everything you're doing in the AI space. But yeah, I mean, I think I agree generally that there's, that as more organizations start to adopt these things, they have to think about, what they're doing and how they're going to make that work. But it is sort of sorry, lost my train of thought here for a second. But it is absolutely, I do agree with what you're saying that that's kind of what I'm seeing as well.
Yeah, yeah. So just moving on to the next one, then the partners and suppliers for our customers who bring in the AI capabilities. again, another really interesting graph in that, um, you know, we're all probably not surprised to see Microsoft up there. Everybody loves OpenAI. It's done really well, even though, of course, Anthropic and Claude, as well as Gemini, have all produced like equally phenomenal LLMs. And then we see SAP right up there with the top four, as it were. Um, were you surprised to see them there at this stage, or do you think that most people are starting to get their head around how they're going to work with SAP, at least in the future, if not in the past so far?
Well, I think this makes a whole lot of sense because given that most people are at the very early stages of adoption, probably what they're using is Microsoft Copilot, and yes, maybe, I mean, there isn't a financial person I know that uses an SAP system that doesn't like to export it to Excel. And then they're probably using Copilot in Excel to do some manipulation of that data,
Mm.
right? So makes the fact that Microsoft is at the top of that list, given that most large enterprise companies have, agreements for Office 365, with Microsoft, makes perfect sense that that's where they are. And given that we're surveying an SAP audience, a primarily SAP audience, it also makes sense that SAP is right there as well. But I mean, I think the fact that the other major public cloud providers are right there. Google has obviously been pushing very hard with their Gemini models. But AWS has actually been working closely with a lot of SAP customers, particularly with technologies like, Bedrock and the ability to do things within AWS and to leverage AI. So it kind of makes sense given that, AWS has been quite aggressively pushing into the SAP space over the last 18 months. Um, it's almost like somebody from SAP went to work there. Um, but I mean, but yeah, since Julia White started at AWS, they've been really pushing aggressively into SAP's enterprise space. And so the fact that, SAP customers are working with AWS, um, because you're already using them maybe for infrastructure, or you're using them in other ways. I think it makes a lot of sense. What is interesting to me here is Databricks is at the top of the list. I mean, we know, SAP OEM Databricks as part of, SAP Databricks as part of BDC. And now there's an SAP Snowflake as well that was announced at the end of last year with the BDC Connect. And that also goes now through to BigQuery. So we're going to sort of see as SAP continues to push BDC and continues to, make that a central part of its, future data strategy, you're going to see more of these connections to things like that'll allow people to use, maybe their existing Databricks or Snowflake or BigQuery deployments and, leverage those. So I think it makes a whole lot of sense in terms of what we're seeing and given where people are. Yeah.
And I suspect if we look at this in a year, maybe even 2 years' time, I think we'll still see SCP right up there. Because as we mentioned earlier, um, not only are customers working towards that point where they can really start adopting business AI, but the pressure really is on SAP to continue to release more and more capabilities, so that customers are getting that value. So I suspect we'll see as more and more of these use cases become real, more customers will be turning to SAP for those solutions.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what SAP does because I mean, Joule has been their primary emphasis on terms of, embedding AI within the applications, but it's not really embedded, is it? It's a co-pilot, right? So and SAP actually did co-pilots a few years back and it didn't see particularly high adoption, which is kind of what I'm hearing a little bit about Joule. Even people that have it aren't necessarily using it a lot or necessarily getting huge value from it. But I think the big thing for SAP is going to be, what they're starting to do. I think there's Q1 this year. Their SAP is going to be releasing the updated versions of their procurement solutions, which are completely rewritten on BTP and have AI natively embedded in the applications. And I think that's where SAP is going to see a stronger growth in AI usage than maybe with something like Joule. Not that Joule doesn't have its value, just the way Microsoft Copilot does, although Microsoft themselves have sort of seen challenges with adoption of Copilot and people not really wanting to use it. But I think it's going to be very interesting in terms of, how that plays out and, what we sort of see over the coming years. Because as SAP continued to rewrite most of their line of business applications, so, success factors, Ariba, customer experience, as they're all rewritten on BTP and they become AI native applications, not just applications with AI. I think we're going to see a much bigger usage of AI within SAP that way.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of potential there, and yeah, pretty exciting. I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what those new applications look like for sure. I suppose the last slide I thought again, and this is a really important slide, of course, is what are the barriers that are keeping people back a little bit. Again, I recognize a lot of these, but maybe Robert, if you want to first give us your highlights from this, and then I'll chip in.
Yeah, I mean, I think I mean, AI is expensive. If you want to do things with AI, particularly even if you're developing your own very self-contained model, I mean, there's a cost involved in that. And yes, I know we've talked about this before, and someone who wants to roll out a subscription to an AI company across their organization versus maybe developing their own model in-house, it actually can be much cheaper to do the latter. But there's still a cost involved, and particularly when people might be a little bit concerned about developing their own models and what that looks like and what they might need to support it, they might be more inclined to go out and, start using or licensing something, excuse me, from somebody else. Even if that's just Office 365 and Copilot, right? But there's a premium to do that. Right. That's an extra 50% on your per user cost or something from Microsoft. So, I think, cost and budgetary constraints makes perfect sense to be at the top of the list. Regulatory, that and ethical concerns, that sort of plays into the whole governance area. There are other large enterprise companies that are, saying things like you can create hundreds of agents, and it's like, is that a good thing? Or a bad thing? I mean, maybe it's hard to say in terms of, but without responsible governance, you don't really know. And then, of course, one of the challenges that we have with new technologies in general is just not a lot of people, because the market is changing so frequently. And, we here at SAP Insider, we're looking ourselves at where and how we can leverage AI. But, the best model for doing A this month might not be the best model for doing the same thing next month. And that is a challenge for organizations that, it's like, well, I've subscribed to, Claude or Perplexity or, Google Gemini. Claude is great for some things today, but in a quarter, who knows? So, and then, yeah, I mean, I think, something I heard Walter Sun, I think, say, at SAP maybe a year ago now, is that it's easy to find business cases for AI. It's hard to find business cases that demonstrate an ROI. And, this has had a lot to do with SAP's approach to how it's rolling out AI to its customer base. And, that was sort of one of the main things that much maligned MIT study sort of showed, I think, isn't that 95% of AI projects failed, but they didn't deliver value. And, so visibility into ROI, cost and budget constraints, all of these things sort of come together. And it makes a lot of sense as to, where we're seeing barriers to adoption.
Yeah, me too as well. I think I certainly see the whole use case ROI pop up a lot. People have tried POCs. I mean, again, this has been a well repeated trope, as it were, in terms of where we are on AI. However, I'm starting to see some breakthroughs. There's a couple of guides I've seen in terms of where to find those good use cases, and two things that keep coming back. One is exception management, where the ability to deal with invoices that don't match POs, and then deal with the vendor after the block happens. That interaction is that type of thing can be done with Gen AI very well. And there's solutions out there at the minute for that. And the other is as a slightly more general, but it would cover exception management, is where people spend a lot of toil, like SMEs, where they spend their time doing reasonably repetitive work, but not completely repetitive. And that might be researching, it might be reviewing contracts, it might be doing a lot of things which were very difficult to program with RPA in the past, but Gen AI has got a great capability there. So certainly one of the things that when we chat to customers, we're trying to say to them is, look, if you're struggling for a good use case, try to see where your people are spending a lot of their time, and try to isolate if there's a lump of toil that could be a good match for Gen AI, and then go after that rather than necessarily trying to prove the technology works, which I think we all know it does. But really, where's the ROI going to be? And as you rightly say, a POC without value is not necessarily failed, but it certainly hasn't been successful in the next step of driving adoption.
Yeah, I was just gonna add, I had an interesting conversation with Motor Oil Hellas last year, about a year ago now, just about where they're using AI, and they're using it very much for preventative maintenance. I mean, you can find that webinar on the SAP Insider website somewhere. But I mean, it's that's exactly what you're talking about with exception reporting, right? And working with those sort of things, right? They can save huge amounts of money based on what they've done. I don't know that it's embedded in their SAP systems at all, but it's where they've used AI, and it's maybe feeding data into BTP applications or something or other about what's coming up. But this is definitely a scenario where you can derive a lot of value.
So I think over the next couple of years, I expect to see this table start to evolve quite a bit. Certainly as SAP release those use cases as part of embedded AI, I think people will start to see that becomes an easier challenge. Money, of course, is always an issue. Nothing gets done in enterprise without a budget. So I think that'll probably always stay number one. But nonetheless, I think we'll start to see hopefully an improvement of that. And then that starts to release some of those earlier charts that we talked about. So Robert, again, we only picked a couple of the highlights. The report is available from SAP Insider for people who want to subscribe and get more details. It's certainly an intriguing read, as all the SAP Insider reports are, of course. But Robert, I just want to say thank you again for taking the time to come and chat about it. And to all of the listeners, if you want to learn more about this, go to the sapinsider.com website, or subscribe to our Roots channel for more information about SAP and AI and other topics, and other recordings with me and Robert in the future. I look forward to seeing you then. Goodbye.
Thank you, Eamonn.